What is the worst case of kids bullying a teacher in school have you ever witnessed? I was in 9th grade. We had a teacher that couldn't start the beginning of the year because she unexpectedly lost her baby. She either had a stillbirth or lost the baby during birth. She started school about 2 weeks after classes started. She explained to us that she was still struggling, but was ready to get to work. I had these few boys in my class that relentlessly told dead baby jokes, sometimes to the point where she would have to leave the room. I'm 24 now and we lost a baby in my family in a similar way. When I think about that poor teacher now, my heart just shatters. Kids can be so awful. I had a chorus teacher who had a miscarriage and tons of kids made her card saying how great she was. A few years later this douchebag kid was in her class. She went from elementary to middle, and he always tormented her. One time he told her he was glad her baby died because she'd be a terrible mother. Disgusting waste of space. There's this lovely old Asian man who teaches math at my school. He is one of the loveliest people I have ever met. He makes a huge effort to remember your name, who you're related to, and always says hi, how are you every time he sees you in his dorky cute foreign voice. He's too calm and nice, so the kids in my year constantly yell at him and disobey him. Even when he's sick they'll just torment him by walking around the room, taking confiscated items, etc. I feel so bad for him. Sounds like my maths teacher in HS. He didn't speak English very clearly, but he was a very skilled mathematician. Kids would make fun of his accent and even trip him as he walked between rows of tables. Thankfully, he got to move up to the senior HS and was treated a lot better since the kids he was teaching wanted to learn. One of my social studies teachers had this classroom with a big storage closet, and so he went back there one day to grab a documentary, and when he was in there some kid pulled the door shut and locked it. The class then spent the entire period watching Superbad on the little car TV that had been wheeled in the movie. I had the class the period afterwards when they finally let him out, and he had this just sad defeated vibe for the next few days. That's so messed up. First year female teacher was getting onto a troublemaker girl who always mouthed off. She started screaming and cursing at the teacher, calling her horrible things. The teacher starts, professionally, yelling at her to leave the classroom, and the girl says, I'm gonna have my friends rape your daughter and kill her. The teacher walked out of the room. Everyone was telling the girl how fricked up that was. A few male teachers came into the room and took the girl out of the classroom. We had another teacher sit with us the rest of the class period. A friend of mine said he saw my teacher crying in the hallway from another classroom after she left. She should have called the police for a threat like that. My APUSH teacher in high school was an excitable but average height man who was very passionate about teaching US history. Most students liked him quite a bit, but every once in a while there would be a student in my school who would try to physically fight a teacher. One kid tries it in the hall, swings at Mr. APUSH. Less than a second later, the kid is sucking wind on the floor and tearing up. Teacher looks him square in the eyes and says, I was a goddamn Marine in Vietnam. I've killed better men than you'll ever be. You're tardy. Lunch detention's in my room today, and walked away. My little brother graduated 4 years after I did and said that nobody had ever fricked with the goddamn Marines since then. I used to teach 4th grade. The day we got back from winter break my first year, one of my favorite students gave me a hug and said, Mr. Yams with extra syrup, you look fat and sleepy. Thanks Yadira. Maybe it was all the yams with extra syrup. In 8th grade, my US history teacher had a student teacher for the last part of the year. He wasn't the most attractive guy, and some of the popular guys started calling him a flack because they said he looked like a duck. They'd quack at him when he'd ask the class to do something, and they'd whisper a flack all during class. Poor guy. He didn't really stand up for himself, like he's self-conscious about his looks and was trying to ignore it. Yeah, the best way to seem confident is to go, I don't look like a duck guys, stop it stoop. There was a history teacher in my middle school who was gay, and when his students found out, they hit him hard with it. He eventually broke down and cried in front of the class about it and talking about how much he loves his students and couldn't understand why they would treat him like that. And middle school kids are like sharks. You spill a little bit of blood in the water and they're going to have a feast. Any signs of weakness and those kids will take full advantage of it. You gotta put those little shoots on lockdown ASAP as a middle school teacher. For some reason their hormones reinforce some sort of mentality that they're top dogs and the teachers are glorified babysitters. You gotta stomp that crap out fast. In my junior year of high school, our English teacher got called out of class. Someone turned off the lights. I thought no biggie, crap happens. When she came back in the room, someone threw and hit her with a hardback English school book. Hit her in the head. She wasn't young either, at least 60. Crap, what happened after? I remember in a 7th grade, there was this teacher right down the hall from the classroom which I had 3 of my classes in. I would constantly hear yelling, screaming, things being thrown, etc. She had a reputation for being one of the worst teachers in the school. One day she just broke down and cried in front of her class. Then, her class lost it and literally ran out of her room and went somewhere in the 8th grade hall. Some of them were caught and suspended. Anyway, one of my classmates decided to look into her window, and she saw just an empty classroom during 6th period with a sobbing teacher in it. It got so serious among us, even our teacher at the time went in to comfort her. That year, her class had the worst scores on any subject on the CRCT or whatever it was called. Worse, since she always yelled at her students, she had worked up a bad reputation with the other teachers. I think she was fired after only 1 year of teaching. We had a substitute English teacher while our regular teacher was out on maternity. The substitute teacher was very young, probably only about 21. Kids used to make her life heck and just didn't respect her. No one listened to a thing she said. Everyone interrupted her when she was talking. People threw stuff at her when her back was turned. No one did any homework she gave them, including me, but I never done any homework, so she cried one day in class and everyone just left to go to the next class. It was a huge thing at the time, and everyone was like, we made her cry, ha ha ha. I felt really bad even though I wasn't involved, and I bought her some chocolate with my lunch money and brought it back to English class. Even my sister called me a dork for that colon. I can almost guarantee you that she still remembers that kindness. Good on you. Back when I was in 8th grade, I was riding the school bus in the morning and one of the bitchiest girls in 7th grade found a dead lizard in the bus and took it to their teacher. The teacher was a very nice old woman who taught for around 40 years and loved her students. Anyway, as soon we got off the bus and into the school, the B-girl immediately put the dead lizard on the teacher's desk and their teacher was screaming and hyperventilating. As soon as that happened, our teacher, who was a young woman in her 20s, immediately went to the 7th grade room and gave them a stern talking about why it was wrong and how they fricked up. We found out later that the 7th graders wanted their teacher to get a heart attack and die on the spot, and they were laughing about too. They were so fricked up. 7th graders wanted their teacher to get a heart attack and die on the spot. What the actual frick? In sophomore year at high school, I had this world history teacher who was this really cool, really smart and kind of younger guy. He was a fantastic teacher, but he was kind of timid around the students when they would act up more, especially the girls, who would tease him more. One girl in particular seemed to get a kick out of making him uncomfortable, usually by this sort of weird flirting when he'd tell her to stop talking in class. It really made me upset sometimes, because it was obvious he hated it, but was just hesitant about giving her any sort of ammo. The tables turned one day, though. See, this girl had this huge disgust over stray hairs. She would react in terror if there were more than a couple stray hairs on her desk. So, one day, when she's out of her seat in class and gossiping or something, he goes by her desk, is making a cover by talking to one of us about the assignment, and with a nervously suppressed grin, uses a pair of scissors to trim his hairy arm onto her desktop. When she sat back down after being told to, and notices a desk covered in stray hair, she ran out of the classroom, gagging and panicking like a small dog having a fit. Later that year, when a few of us were in his room during lunch, he showed us a bunch of pictures of his college friends and trips and stuff, and noticing a thumbnail, we get him to reluctantly open a picture of him in full US Army combat kit with a few other soldiers, standing in the turret of a tank in Afghanistan or Iraq, can't remember which. He was the driver, and did a tour. Blew our minds. He was a solid guy, but he was always so dorky and earnest, and never acted anything like a soldier. It made me think, this guy probably went through so many pranks from his guys. He must have been itching to get back at this girl and just couldn't hold back a kinda smallish prank on her to get the score even. Nobody gave him real grief after that, though. Ultimately, I think it was too unexpected for a teacher to learn and use our phobias to keep us in line if we pushed too hard. Like we were years behind him and fricking with people. Dude, that is the best way of establishing dominance I've ever heard. Totally non-violent, impossible to be punished for, extremely effective. Yeah, that's a military man all right. My high school had a Mexican Spanish teacher that barely spoke a word of English. Before finals week, a few kids told her there was a spider in her closet and locked her in when she checked. They then accessed her gradebook and changed everybody's grade to 1000%. Not a typo. She didn't notice and got fired. History teacher in middle school. The kids flooded the classroom so he would slip, would interrupt lessons constantly with insults, moved tables and chairs while he was talking so everyone was sitting with their backs to him, would openly make fun of the way he spoke moved. Throughout all of that he kept being nice calm. Then, when he returned from a sabbatical that had him trapped while that tsunami happened in India, he was just changed. He came down hard on anyone who interrupted class. Detention. Parents invited, etc. Class grades dropped a lot too after that. I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction. I had a math teacher that, as I'm now an adult, I have so much respect for. It was 6th grade and all we did as a class was raise heck. Nothing insane, just a lot of obnoxious stuff. A few of the things we did were having eraser fights and stealing all his chalk. He was a huge prude, so we'd find ways to work the number 69 into anything so he'd blush. It even got so bad with that number that one time when doing a math problem on the board he realized 5 minutes and that was going to be the answer and just said never mind and erased it. He'd change your grade if that's what it came out to as well. It got to the point that he'd sent kids to ISS just for saying it. Finally he'd always say throw me a bone guys when we were not getting it but should be. We all brought in dog treats for like a week waiting for him to say it, and when he did we all threw them at him. He actually laughed at that one though. He left for a different school after that year. His first year at my school. The thing is, no matter how bad we pushed him he never screamed at us and never lost his cool. I was one of the worst, and the few times I actually needed help he really pulled through for me and you could tell he absolutely cared so much. I actually ran into him later in life and had the opportunity to apologize for being such a little crap. He was super nice then too. Thanks Mr. W. You were one of the best teachers I had. I was the same way. I hope I find some of my old teachers. I'd really like to apologize. There's a teacher in my school that no one really likes, but some kid took it a little too far. He made a fake news article online and sent it to everyone. The article accused him of being a child molester. It blew up quicker than he anticipated, and people ratted on him because he wasn't the most liked kid either. The kid was brought into the office, wasn't seen for about 2-3 weeks, and the teacher hasn't been seen since. Pretty sure he was fired or quit. I don't know. It was pretty fricked up, I'll be honest. The teacher wasn't good at his job at all, and he wasn't too good with the kids, but being accused of molesting children, regardless of it being a joke, can ruin you. My wife's teacher had to step out of the room for something one day. A kid, ran downstairs and outside, and laid down under the open window. First though, he gave one of the drama kids a shoe. When the teacher came back, the actor kid, one of the best students, making it more believable, did his best cry on command and said something like I tried to pull him up. The class also did a great job of not giving it away. The teacher absolutely flipped out and ran out of the room and down to Dom. She was understandably pissed off when he turned out to be alive. No one got in trouble. I hope they at least did this to the drama teacher. That would have been incredible. Any other teacher, maybe not so much. There was this really rude, straight up Hitler girl in my grade who was always confrontational and would seek arguments and conflict with teachers. One of my favorite teachers had just lost his mother and was recently back from a leave of absence related to her passing. Hitler girl really picked her day, I guess, and she picked a fight with him over homework. The poor guy was so drained. He didn't even try arguing with her. At some point he talked back and she replied with how's your mom doing? He sent her to the office and kept the class going, but there's no way that comment didn't frick him up. Boil her in oil. Our form tutor, also the Italian teacher, was very stylish and had a taste for expensive suits, one of which was a very pricey off-white Chanel number. One of the girls in my class broke open a red biro and smeared ink on the back of teacher's chair, so when she sat down it went all over her suit. She was absolutely gutted. Later we were asked to anonymously write on pieces of paper who had done it, or something else if we didn't want to say, and the culprit was pretty confident no one was going to grass her up. But apparently everyone wrote her name on their pieces of paper. At least justice was served in this case. Hope she was punished. In a just world, she should have had to work herself to the bone to replace that suit. Sex ed. Back in 5th grade. By sex education I mean they taught the boys about reproductive organs and the girls about periods. There were 3 5th grade teachers. 2 were very sweet, pretty mild in general. One was a B, but who knows what was going on in her life. She was just pretty blunt abrasive, which can be a little scary for 5th graders. Anyways, in hindsight, all 3 teachers actually did something really cool. They all talked fairly frankly about their own periods. It was pretty comforting, even though most of us had not gotten our own periods yet, to hear how different they can be and how that is totally okay. So the one mean teacher, we'll call her Ms. F, described that she used tampons without an applicator, and that she had a really heavy flow, and immediately all of the girls are giggling and whispering. I've never seen shame like the shame that played across Ms. F's face at that moment. She may have been terse, but she didn't deserve to feel gross or weird just because she had a heavy flow. It was heartbreaking to watch. Later on, I myself would be diagnosed with endometriosis, and I just think that if I ever had to speak in front of 5th grade girls, I'd want to be just as honest, and I hope that Ms. F knows she gave me comfort in sharing such honest words. To this day I still remember everything so clearly. Crazy. Obligatory. I can't help it that I have a heavy flow and a wide set vagina. But seriously, I don't think many people had teachers that were willing to do that. I know I didn't, and it would have been really comforting. It wasn't as bad as most of these, but in year 11 we had a very young maths teacher. He was only a few years older than us, and if you put him in a uniform he would have looked like a tall year 9. We used to mess with his head on a regular basis, but the things that stick out were: 1. Fairly early on he got pulled out of the classroom by the department head for about 10 minutes to deal with something. In that time we rearranged the classroom to be facing the opposite way, including his desk. 2. Every time he left the room after that, he would come back to a massive hairy dong taking up the entire whiteboard. 3. After he said we lacked imagination after the 20th or so time this happened, we switched to drawing a big vagina. 4. Once there was a note passed around the room to write teacher's name, shaves his legs on a piece of paper and put it in the bin. After the first few people walked past him he looked up to see a queue of 20 or so people. After he told us to stop messing around and get on with our work, he sneakily got one of the papers from the bin and read it. He wasn't best pleased. The worst part of it was, we were top set. Mr. Hendrickson. Very pale, very blonde, always wore very ugly sweaters. I believe he was my Spanish teacher during the 8th grade. Now, while my school wasn't located in an inner city environment, we were between 2 of our state's biggest cities, and so we got students from both cities attending, making the school's demographics interesting. Imagine your typical freedom writers type of school, without the uplifting teacher. Now, Mr. Hendrickson was literally the nicest guy, although a bit strange, but very caring and sweet nonetheless. That didn't stop every single class he had from relentlessly torturing him. There were classmates of mine that would literally tell him shut up, as he would open his mouth and the class would erupt in laughter. Students were physically touching him, pushing him, harassing him, making fun of his very high-pitched voice. You name it. You could see his spirit break every single day until one day he snapped. He yelled at everyone, and after a short silence, he once again was told to shut up, which was followed by hysterical laughter as usual. He broke. He eventually stopped writing students up, sending them out, anything along those lines. Started showing us movies instead of teaching. Even after all that, He was still voted to kiss a dead fish at a pep rally in front of the entire school. Honestly, I never felt so bad for a guy. I hope he's doing okay. This breaks my heart. My favorite teacher who was a gay and the students found out when she took her girlfriend to a basketball game. Everyone in my class was so mean, calling her a dyke under their breath and asking about her girlfriend in taunting ways. I was always really quiet and just observed, not ballsy enough to say anything. It felt terrible because she had pulled me aside several times asking if things were okay at home and became someone trusted to talk to, really going above and beyond. I actually looked her up not too long ago and emailed her and told her how much I remember and appreciated her as a teacher. It made me feel a lot better and hopefully had positive effects on her as well. Emailed her and told her how much I remember and appreciated her as a teacher. This melted my heart. More people should do this to their former teachers. I had a nice professor for my English class for my first semester in college. She was completely fair to everyone and explained anything other classmates didn't understand. However, there was one that was always a problem. Someone so lazy that she wouldn't do her homework, quizzes, tests, etc. and would just always cause trouble for the professor. When she comes into class one day about halfway into the semester, my professor told her that she was failing and there was no way to make a comeback. This led to both of them stepping out of the classroom to talk more while the rest of us just waited in class. We started hearing screaming and heard a thump noise after a few minutes. We ran to the door to see what happened and we found our professor on the floor crying. A couple of people went to find the classmate while the rest of us tried to comfort the professor. I've seen two male teachers break down in tears. One after he sat down on a chair that a little hooligan had completely covered the seat in PVA glue. Another when a student asked how many air holes were in the crate that his wife arrived in. Mail order bride. In middle school, my entire 7th grade village combined forces to pick on our English teacher. So the way our school worked was that students were all assigned to a village and rotated between 3 main teachers: English, Science, and History. So our village had a total of around 60-70 students. She was an easy target because she had a noticeable Indian accent and students would pretend to not understand what she was saying. Also, she assigned a lot of homework. Honestly, it wasn't excessive. Students were just lazy. So the kids all started spreading rumors about how she assigned too much homework. They couldn't understand what she was saying. Total bulls. Her grammar was perfect and she was completely understandable. And someone claimed she said frick in class once and that spread until people said she swore in class. This was in a nice school district where not a lot of shady stuff happened, so our administration had nothing much to do. She ended up getting investigated so many times, and other teachers claimed they talked to her to reduce the homework load. There was this heavy implication that she was used to Indian standards of teaching and didn't quite understand the American way of teaching. By the end of the year, she was letting her students run everything because she was too scared to do anything that would annoy her students. Which meant all our homework became optional and everyone basically got A's. I was just so disgusted with my class that year. Sorry Mrs. Sharma, you weren't a terrible teacher. All the Indian women I've run into in my small town, about 9,500 people, have been so nice, strict, but fair. Mrs. Sharma sounds lovely. Some of the kids in my school were actual pricks to the teachers, like the time a very overweight teacher fell down the stairs and was hospitalized, and everyone just made jokes about the floor being broken. But all the stuff I personally saw or took part in was just playful crap. We had this physics teacher who said the word pixels a lot when we were covering resolution and such, and I mean a lot. So one day before he made it to class we wrote it in tiny letters on every inch of the board. There was another thing with the same teacher where we hid in a supply closet before he got to the classroom. We were in that room the period before but the teachers swapped between periods and he spent ages running around looking for us. And when he got back we all pretended nothing had happened. Okay, those last two are pretty funny. I mean if I was a teacher I would break down giggling at those. I was in a Japanese program growing up, and in 7th grade our class had this Japanese teacher who was just awful. She had no control over the classroom and was a horrible teacher. Most of the boys in our class in particular were terrible in the class, and left her in tears several times because they would talk over her, play games blatantly during class, etc. When she wasn't crying, she also fell asleep in class several times, and by the end of the year the administration finally started looking into it and found out she wasn't actually certified to work at an accredited school, and thus she was dismissed at the end of the year. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.